Capital punishment in Australia has been abolished in all jurisdictions since 1985. Queensland abolished the death penalty in 1922. Tasmania did the same in 1968. The Commonwealth abolished the death penalty in 1973, with application also in the Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory. Victoria did so in 1975, South Australia in 1976, and Western Australia in 1984. New South Wales abolished the death penalty for murder in 1955, and for all crimes in 1985. In 2010, the Commonwealth Parliament passed legislation prohibiting the re-establishment of capital punishment by any state or territory. Australian law prohibits the extradition or deportation of a prisoner to another jurisdiction if they could be sentenced to death for any crime. Martha Rendell was the last woman to be hanged in Western Australia. She was found guilty of the willful murder of her de facto husband's son, Arthur Morris, in 1908. She was also suspected of the killing of his two daughters Annie and Olive. It was alleged that she killed the children by swabbing hydrochloric acid on the back of their throats. Rendell killed 7-year-old Annie first. Her method was to put something in the child's food that would result in a sore throat. It was alleged that she killed the children by swabbing hydrochloric acid on the backs of their throats, claiming it was medicine. This would inflame the throat until the child could no longer eat, and thus would starve to death. Annie died on the 28th of July 1907. Dr. Cuthbert issued a certificate stating the cause of death was diphtheria. After killing Annie, she turned her attention on Olive, aged 5. Olive died on the 6th of October 1907, and again Cuthbert issued a certificate stating the cause of death was diphtheria. In the winter of 1908, Rendell tried the same method on Arthur, the third son and youngest child still alive. Arthur, who was 14, took longer to succumb to the treatment, finally dying on the 6th of October 1908. Cuthbert asked permission for an autopsy. Rendell said she wanted to be present during the investigation. She stood by as the autopsy was performed, and the doctors found nothing to incriminate her. In April 1909, she turned her attention on the second son, George. It didn't take long for the second son to complain of a sore throat after drinking a cup of tea. Rendell coated his tonsils with the syrup, frightening the boy, who ran to his mother's place some streets away. Neighbors would inquire as to the boy's whereabouts. However, his father Thomas Morris would state that he did not know. Rendell was the common-law wife of Thomas Morris, and she cold-bloodedly murdered 3 of his children by swabbing their throats with spirits of salts. Although the children died slow and agonizing deaths, they had been treated by a number of doctors during their illness, only one of whom had expressed any doubts on their deaths. The crimes only came to light in early April 1909 when a brother, George Morris, was reported missing, and neighbors expressed concern as his 2 sisters and a brother had died in suspicious circumstances. Detective Sergeant Mann and Constable Lamond took over inquiries and found George at his mother's home. He claimed to have run away because his stepmother had killed his siblings and was trying to poison him with spirits of salts. The inquiry was hampered by the period of time that had elapsed since the deaths and because doctors could not say what effect swabbing with spirits of salts would have. Suspicions were further aroused when it was shown that Rendell had purchased large quantities of spirits of salts during the period of the children's illnesses, but none since the last death. Armed with this information, the detectives obtained permission to exhume the bodies, and this was done on July 3, 1909. Autopsies showed that a poison had been administered, and this had caused inflammation and hemorrhage of the bowel. However, It was not until dozens of witnesses had been questioned that a neighbor gave evidence that through a window, she had seen Rendell swabbing Arthur Morris's throat and had heard his agonized screams and cries for help. On a visit to Rendell, she had smelt the bottle and experienced strong fumes and burning, but Rendell claimed that a doctor had prescribed medication. As there was no scientific evidence of the effect of swabbing with spirits of salts, man prevailed upon the Department of Health to experiment on rabbits and guinea pigs. This proved that such swabbing would bring about the effect seen by the autopsies. No motive could be found apart from Rendell's infatuation with Morris and her anger at the children's disobedience. Although Thomas Morris was also charged with the murders, he was acquitted as it was believed that, although he had purchased spirits of salts, he had not been aware of the crimes until after the children's deaths. However, he had lied to police and to the coroner. Martha Rendell was an unattractive, aging, home-wrecking trollop who abandoned her own 3 children to follow a man across country. She was all of these things, contemptible to Perth society of the early 1900s. The criminal case against Martha shreds easily. This is a clear instance of societal prejudices putting a woman to death simply because she was not liked, and she did not live by the right rules. Martha Rendell was irascible. She did not get on well with others. When her sham marriage to Thomas Morris was uncovered, upon her criminal arrest, the public outrage was very real and very vocal. Martha did not live by the rules of the day. She had stolen another woman's husband. Martha knew she would be in trouble if anyone found out the illicit nature of her living with Thomas. Hence, she used the name Mrs. Morris and required the children to call her mother. This only makes sense. Additionally, the claim she had bitten the girl Annie to the point where she could not walk may be true. However, Martha would not have been the first or last person in that era to abuse a child in the name of discipline. That does not excuse the behavior, but much was made of it. Had the police bothered to dig into that neighborhood's other denizens, they would have found child abuse and neglect elsewhere as well. On the 14th of September 1909, Rendell was found guilty by the jury and sentenced to death by hanging. Rendell protested her innocence, maintaining that she was treating the children for diphtheria. Thomas Morris was acquitted. It was believed that while he had purchased spirits of salts, he was not aware of what Martha was doing until after the children's deaths. The jury had wanted to find him guilty of being an accessory after the fact, but this was not allowed. She was hanged at Fremantle Prison at 8 a.m. on the 6th of October 1909. The execution was witnessed by 25 people, the largest number of witnesses for an execution at Fremantle, despite the sheriff barring press attendance. She is buried at Fremantle Cemetery, in the same grave where serial killer Eric Edgar Cook was interred more than half a century later. Martha Rendell was the third and last woman executed in Western Australia. She was 38 years old at the time of her execution. Thank you for watching Death Row.